make it 11 o'clock, so shall we start? No. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dominic, and before I introduce our speaker for today's session, Mike J, just a few housekeeping items of note. If any attendee has any technical, IT or sound issues with today's webinar, please use the Q&A panel and I'll do my very best to assist. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. After typing your questions in the space at the bottom, hit the send button, and please be sure to direct your questions to all panellists in the drop-down menu. Your questions will not be seen by other members of the audience and will be addressed, time permitting, at the end of the session. A reminder too that all our webinars are recorded and are available for listening again on the Risk Authority website, along with a copy of the presentation slides. And now I'm pleased to hand you over to our presenters today, Mike J.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunkist Moulton in Marsh. You have my thanks and admiration for being here on a Friday in front of the screen on such a lovely day. So we're going to talk today about site security. And for the sake of clarity, I should say I'm not talking particularly, or at all actually, about construction site security, but about the security of a site that has a currently occupied enterprise on it or a building that has been vacated and is unoccupied. So what this boils down to is we'll be looking at this subject in two areas. First of all, the security against unlawful and unauthorised access to sites on which the buildings are occupied currently, and of course, secondly, those where they've been vacated. A lot of what we'll be talking about actually will have some application to construction sites, although I said it wouldn't, in the sense that some of the detection devices and physical protections that are mentioned in the seminar, in the webinar, are of course applicable to a construction site. So what we'll be looking at is site layout, site perimeter, exterior security systems, CCTV, and guarding, and finally, separately, unauthorised occupation. So the first 5 bullet points there are to do with all sites, whether they're occupied or unoccupied. And then the final bullet will be centered under that heading of that bullet purely on the issues that arise if the building is not being attended and is empty. Very, very briefly on the layout. You're unfortunate enough to have a layout like the diagram on the left. It's actually the fair representation of the computer center that my previous company used to occupy. Concealed there in the middle is not ideal. Park at the back, railway line to the side, with consequential opportunities for access. Anything near a railway line or a canal, you're just slightly on the back foot to start with. If you can influence that during the life of the site in any way, of course, that's all to the good. So some principles here straight from the textbook, if you like. I think the first principle should have been make sure you've got a secure perimeter, physical perimeter. And then the others follow. The space between the perimeter and the buildings, I won't read through them all. You'll have your own idea of which of those you would attach a lot of importance to, and it would vary according to your interest in the risk if you're an insurer, and I think there are possibly some insurers on our listener panel today. Then you might not be so interested in pilfering from the loading bay, but on the other hand, you may be if it's a cargo policy. So each of those will be of some interest to you, one way or to one degree or another. If I had to pick one, I'd pick natural surveillance. So A secure perimeter, let's look at where we are with it. Today's picture is more and more what we see in the bottom image there. We see a completely open and accessible building. This would, of course, in yesteryear been quite unheard of, because as soon as people formed colonies and they had assets, they realized they needed to protect them physically by having a perimeter, a stockade or a cordon of some kind around them, as well as surveillance and guarding, of course. Otherwise, well, you lose the lot. So things have moved on. We're now civilized, aren't we? But of course, this does leave us a bit exposed. We don't give a building like the bottom of thought. But I shall be banging a drum during this webinar for at least some of the time trying to think in terms of improving on that situation where possible. Controversially, as we do have some insurers on the line, I thought I might have a little dig at my own old industry here and say, well, understandably, for an insurer, the focus is all on the building generally, the construction, how to protect the openings, the security systems above all. And once we've achieved what we want there on the building, there is, dare I say it, a slight tendency to nod the perimeter through and not make an issue of it. Perhaps that's being unfair, because there is always pushback from the customer against expenditure, major expenditure on the perimeter. First of all, there's that issue of the image of the business. I have an open, fresh, modern building here. It's cost me several tens of millions. I don't want an ugly fence around it. What would some sort of physical perimeter do to my business process? Goods in, goods out, people movements, just the general image that's projected to the business community. And so in my experience, and I may be in a minority here, but in my experience, insurers rarely make perimeter security an actual deal breaker, if I can put it that way. What would be the purpose? If I'm banging the drum for it, what's the purpose of a secure perimeter? I think psychological deterrent shouldn't be discounted. Psychological deterrent is worth a lot, as well as it being a significant obstacle. You will be delaying the invader. You'll be frustrating the removal of property. If you've got guarding there, it does, of course, support them and allow the guards to challenge whoever they find on site. What's this person doing there? If the place is all locked up and I've got a secure perimeter, then anyone I find in the grounds is, on the face of it, a trespasser, and I can get a bit tough. So, what are we faced with if we have no perimeter? Well, you know, you can freely reconnoiter and reconnaissance. You can wander about and vandalize, just generally be antisocial, mug people as they enter and leave during the dark winter evenings. You can ram raid those shutters, you can squat, you can steal. And in a sense, you're saying, I'm open house, come and get me. So, forms of perimeter security broken down into the vehicular access to the building and pedestrian access. All sorts of things there you can do to inhibit vehicular access. For most businesses, this is not a particularly pressing issue, but believe me, if you go to some sites, you've probably seen them yourselves, some cigarette warehouses or places like that. They are big users of environmental landscaping, earthworks, water barriers, ditches, lakes, all sorts of things, just to ensure that in a nice, aesthetically pleasant way, you can protect your installation against hostile vehicles. Blocks and boulders come into it, which we'll be mentioning later. Pedestrian access is obviously controlled by walls and fences. And on the subject of fences, there is a British standard. It's BS 1722 fences. It's broken down, you won't be able to read that, but it's broken down into 18 parts, believe me. If you want to read them all and buy them, then they're freely available on BSI Shop, if you've got a good budget. And amongst those are some of the well-known favourite types of security fence. And the more secure type fencing is generally broken down into a number of grades, which progressively increase in security value from being just sufficient to keep kids out right up to giving professional intruders a hard time. Secured by Design also have a scheme, their LPS 1175 intruder-resistant building components, and that's broken down into grades 1 to 5. I think if you've got a grade 3 offence, you're probably doing very well. Equally, you can go onto the Police Secured by Design website. They have a web page or several web pages of various security fence products. As for the contractor who's installing your fence, unless you're very comfortable with your contractor, then it might be wise to take reference with one of the reputable fencing professional bodies, associations, the Fencing Construction Association or the European Fencing Industry Association. There are numerous types of fence, as you know. These are the better, the more widely used fences you see in a security context: Palisade, welded mesh, electric fence. As for height, the accepted wisdom is absolute minimum 2.4 metres to the top of the enhancement being the entanglements and the topping on the top of the fence that prevent people or frustrate people climbing over, but preferably 2.9 metres in total. Chainlink we can discount, that's of no serious value because it's so easily overcome by simple tools. This is a more serious fencing type, the Palisade, but you can immediately see its Achilles heel, which is that it's attached top and bottom to a horizontal rail, and if that attachment can be overcome, then even a fairly tubby employee in the factory can squeeze through. It's not exactly a Slim Jim, so that just shows you what its weakness is. However, if you go for a slightly more expensive version from a manufacturer that has a patented design, they do have ways of overcoming that risk. The most highly thought of, I suppose, general use fencing is used in prisons and national infrastructure places and all sorts of commercial applications is welded steel mesh 358, and the mesh you can see bottom right corner is very close, and that means it's very, very difficult to wield effective and powerful handheld tools to snip away at those steel rods. You don't have the space to open the jaws of the tool. And that means that trying to overcome that fence entails quite a lot of effort and time. And on a day like this, you really couldn't be bothered. And a really nasty looking topping there, or enhancement as they're calling it. Razor wire in various coils and strands. And then finally, the electric fence is actually a dual purpose device, because those strands of wires you should be able to see on the images there carry an electric voltage which is strong enough to give you a really nasty shock, and you'll recoil from it, I can assure you, but it won't kill you. Well, we believe it won't kill you. But of course, put it this way, it's passed all the national health and safety tests and requirements. But none of that doesn't alter the fact that if a child's got on that top of that wall and touches it and drops off and is badly injured, then it's a moot point as to where liability lies. So you need warning signs, and you need to be careful how it's deployed so that that risk is minimised. But it is very useful as a wall topping, and it can be stretched across the fencing as well, Palisade fencing, showing there on the right how it's extended across a working gate. Now, I did say it's dual purpose. The one purpose is to shock you, and the other purpose is that if you grab at that wire and displace it in any way at all, it acts as an alarm system, and it will generate an alarm signal. Walls are bad news for security people because they're so easily scaled or surmounted, climbed over. And I think probably above all, they are opaque, so those who've made it to the inside of the wall can't be seen by people outside who may be looking over the safety and security of the building. Equally, those on the inside looking out can't see what's going on just outside just beyond the brick wall. There's an enhancement there in the picture on the right, and it's, I suppose, a medium effect. If you go on Google, you find, and they range from really puny right up to really devastatingly horrible things that you can put on the top of your wall if you choose to. You probably won't, if somebody's invested that amount of money in a wall such as that on the left, you probably won't be able to do much except have an enhancement or some sort of electric fence or something of that kind. When it comes to gates, and here we have a hinged gate, quite a big one. The two main points, I suppose, about gates are that the height and material should be consistent with the barrier, with the fencing. There's no point in having a terrific fence and then a gate that's 18 inches lower. So it ought to be all to be equal. And secondly, you must just check that the hinges, somebody's taken the trouble to make sure you can't lift the gates off the hinges. There's a fitting usually, as here, supplied by the manufacturer, so you fit your decent CEM graded padlock to that. And for good measure, I suggest you also put a decent high-value motorcycle chain and padlock around it as well, and you'll get recommendations. You'll get approved products of that kind listed on Secured by Design and their sister website. Moving on, when the gates get cumbersome and so large that each leaf becomes really difficult to operate, then you've got the option of a sliding gate, and these are electrically powered, but they operate very slowly. What I suggest is that if they're too slow for you, discuss it with the supplier. I understand you can get a speed gate, a more up-to-date version of that, which you'll find will operate in about 15 seconds. So we're moving on now from the perimeter to, we're still on gates. Right, traffic management barriers we'll not dwell on because they're purely for the traffic. They don't have a security function. But the version that will stop a hostile vehicle, these pictures of products here are in the jargon hostile vehicle mitigation products, and they conform to a standard, British standard PAS 68, and that's what you should be aiming for. And I think that you'll find there are grades within PAS 68 for the different types of vehicle, truck, that you think could be deployed against you. So if it's a great big sort of 3-axle thing, I don't know what they are, 12 or 15 tons or something, that you need really huge defences, because these are really formidable weapons and they're being used more and more, of course, sadly. So that barrier on top left there, although it's a barrier which manages the traffic, that will also stop a 7.5-ton truck. And there's a picture on the right. Alternatively, the rising barriers, wedge-shaped barriers that come out of the road and then retract into the road after, if the vehicle is being permitted entry, and the fixed bollards across glass. All these products comply with PAS 68. We're moving away now from physical security to electronic security detection systems. Okay, if you bear with me, I will now turn my attention to this. Now, these detect an intruder entering through a secure area. They're often referred to as PIDS, P-I-D-S, which stands for Perimeter Intrusion Detection System. Now, these systems are only designed if there are people on site who will manage the system and examine the signals coming from the system and make a decision on them, because so many alarms are generated, so many alarm conditions are generated by these systems, quite obviously from, and quite to be expected from the environment, from things moving in the environment, animals, vegetation, and the elements, wind and everything else. So they're not designed to be connected automatically to the police like an automatic building intruder alarm. So they must not and are not connected to the police. Now, having said that, they are extremely flexible, and you can tune them to do whatever you want them to do. They're quite unlike an intruder alarm in a building. They're really quite sophisticated and complex, or they can be quite complex installations. Why would you have one of these things? Well, you may think that your perimeter is inadequate. You may think that the surveillance over a very big perimeter around a very big site, is just too much for one or two guards, if you've got even those. You may want to know more quickly than line of sight that you've got somebody making a penetration through your perimeter. So that's why you would have one. They generally are used. The higher the target that it is that you're trying to protect, the more security you need, then the more likely you are to want to have one of these systems, I suggest. If for example, you are protecting a reservoir supplying a city, maybe that is, or maybe not, in that image on the bottom right, then a puny physical barrier like that may not give you a lot of confidence, and you'd want to know for sure that perimeter will have something on it that will inform you immediately somebody's made a penetration. So we're looking at the technology of particularly of the detection devices for external systems. What I've done is thought about it as falling in one camp or another, one of two camps. The first one being the intrusion of a physical perimeter, so something tangible on the perimeter, per the image on the left of that box there, with somebody smashing through something that needs a certain amount of force to do so. And then on the other hand, the other type being the type whereby an intruder can enter a zone without any effort whatsoever, maybe just walking in. So on the first of those, easily the most favoured is simply to, assuming it's a fence, of course, is simply to attach a microphonic or vibration sensitive device, which is usually a linear device, such as a simple coaxial cable clipped to the fence, or in the right-hand image there, that actually is a fibre optic, which does a similar job. Equally, you can have discrete boxes on certain panels, as in the centre picture, which are tunable to that particular panel. They're a bit more flexible and give you a bit more control, and also break down the system into nice manageable zones. So there's a few ways of doing this, but basically what they're doing is picking up noise and vibration on the fence caused by somebody trying to get through it. Now, if you've got no physical perimeter, then these are the sorts of options you have. The passive infrared, which you're almost certainly familiar with, either in a form of a beam or a fan curtain pattern. Point-to-point links, like an infrared beam or a microwave fence. A laser scan device, which is a brand new, well, not brand new, but quite new development, and the buried sensor, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I've also learned that what has come in very recently, or what people are pushing hard recently, is what they're referring to as radar. Nothing new under the sun there. They're calling it a radar device, and I'll mention that, if I can remember, on the next slides. So, first of all, you're familiar with the beam-type protection detection field you get from an external grade passive infrared detector, the red wall detector, which everybody's fairly familiar with, who visits car showrooms and garden centres, usually connected to cameras. So that's a beam seen from the side and seen from above. The active beam interruption devices, as opposed to the passive devices, obviously the one on the left is the infrared beam with transmitter, receiver, and the lattice of various elaborate patterns of beams. They're invisible beams, by the way. You don't see the red lines. That's quite an elaborate one, I must say. It would be very difficult to get through that. They're usually not quite so elaborate as that, but they do the job. And then equally effective, the microwave fence, which is in the form of a cigar-shaped balloon of electromagnetic energy. The only weak spots there are the triangular area just beneath the transmitter and the receiver. If you know about the dead spots, you might be able to crawl through there. So you might need to do something about that physically. And I did say there's a buried sensor, which is sometimes called a geophone. These are quite rare animals, and they're buried in a trench, and then the trench covered over and all turfed over. So they are totally covert, and for that reason they're very attractive to people in trust house, or not trust house, stately homes and that sort of thing, who don't want any overt security showing whatsoever. They want the whole thing covered over. So at a price, you can have a geophone system. They've been around a very long time. I'm sure they've come on a lot with modern electronics and are more discriminatory against environmental problems like waterlogged ground and that sort of thing. But they were a bit temperamental when they first came out. But they do have an attraction for certain types of specifier, as I say, at a price, because there's a lot of groundwork to do, and the devices themselves are a bit exotic. They're a bit like a miniature earthquake seismic thing, just in miniature. And I did say, if I move back, I did say there is another detector, and that is the radar detector. I don't know much about this, not having gone to IFSEC this year, but apparently it's the big thing these days is a radar detector, which, if you know anything about radar, and I don't, it can cover a huge area. It can cover a small site, but it can equally cover a huge, huge site with radar energy. And the cleverness, as always with these devices over the years, is that the software and the electronics in the device can identify where there is movement, in which direction, and give you information. If not visual information, it can tell you that you've got something out there that's moving in a concerted way, one way or the other, and you need to do something about it. So that sounds quite promising, but all sorts of promises are being made apparently, and it's a suck it in the sea on that one. Application issues, just a few practical points really. If you are using fencing as the platform for detection, it must be in good order, it must be rigid, well maintained. It's good practice if you've got the budget and you've got the risk to justify it, to layer the protection, so have at least, don't just settle for one line of protected fence. Have two, and then you form a sandwich with a sterile area in between in which an intruder is trapped and can be detected at leisure by a device in the sterile zone. And finally, manage the false alarms, even though there are people on site looking at these alarms coming in and taking decisions on them. Nonetheless, you don't want them swamped to the extent that the system loses credibility. So try and eliminate as much as you can by way of taking care of positioning of detectors to avoid the rising sun in the morning and at sunset, to avoid waving tree branches and trees that may develop into trees 5 years later, and pools of water, and it goes on and on, but you get the message. CCTV I've thrown in here. It's not really an external detection device in the sense of an outdoor alarm system, but it is, of course, widely used as an electronic form of site detection, and its great benefit, of course, being that you can cover a huge area of the site with particularly a pan, tilt, zoom camera. And on the other hand, you can zoom in on a particular face and identify it. So it's an enormously powerful technology, and people automatically, I think, tend to think, oh, well, we need television, don't we? And sometimes I think they're being a bit gung-ho there, and there can be a better way than just putting up lots of cameras, because at the end of the day, if you put up 50 cameras, you've got to find someone to sit there and look at these screens. And he's going to quickly lose the will to live. And he needs paying as well, which makes it even worse. So, you know what comes next? That's our fault that this child of television, the Detector-activated version of television, is the answer to this, and we in our committee are very keen on this. Sadly, it's not used enough. This activates, this generates a picture for an operator to view from a television camera only if a detector such as the passive infrared detector has detected movement. So the operator doesn't have a lot to do unless and until there is an image for him to analyze, and that's the value of that. And the even bigger value with that is that if you conform to the relevant British standard, which is BS 8418 detector activated CCTV, the police will award you a unique reference number, which is the equivalent URN that you get with an approved building intruder alarm system. So you get privileged response and an emergency connection and so on. Manned guarding is a fairly controversial subject, broken down into a number of issues. Should you have a static guard, or a static guard being sat in the building, a visiting guard turning up 2 or 3 times a night, whatever you decide you want? Obviously, the weakness of the latter is that the bad guys come when the guard isn't there. In-house versus commercial is also controversial. If you want to train your own staff and save some money, I would suggest you shouldn't have much confidence in your own staff being guards unless they're trained by a professional guarding training operation. I would maintain numbers. You need at least two guards. If you're serious enough to pay for guards on your site, surely you'd want 2 rather than 1. You'd want one based in a secure place with access to communications, taking an overview of everything, and you want the other one out there patrolling around the site. The assignment instruction is absolutely vital, so you must decide where you want the guard to patrol. You must make sure he's got a clocking system, so you've got an audit trail of where he's been and what time. And finally, you want to make sure that the guards you use, if they're commercial guards, are those on the list of the National Security Inspector at the NSI, or the Security Systems Alarm and Inspection Board, the SSAIB. Failing that, you could think about whether or not, depending on the risk, whether or not they're if they're not listed by one of the inspection bodies. You ask the question: are they at least a Security Industry Authority approved contractor scheme contractor? So that's the SIA-ACS acronym at the bottom there, SIA-ACS. If they're an approved contractor, then that does have gives them some credibility. Now, moving on now to this vexed question of void buildings. This has been a real thorn in the side of property owners and insurers now for the last 18 months. The things that they get up to, of course, are just pure squatting, living on the premises. Along the way, they cause damage, and they steal, they hold raves, and above all, they might be fly tippers. And I'm told by people in our group that it's not just vacated buildings. This is also happening occasionally where there is somebody on those premises, maybe a guardian of some sort, and the person is roughed up and shoved out the way, and people come in, gangs come in mob-handed, take the place over. This is usually for fly tipping. Fly tipping is, in general, quite aside from empty premises. Fly tipping is a national problem. I'm sure you'll know, just driving around the countryside. There are 1 million reported cases a year. They've recently found 600 tons of garbage under the A40 flyover at Denham, and there's an image of it on the bottom left. Those who do the dumping in the vacant buildings, these are generally as I say, they come mob-handed. They're large groups of very determined people, and they're very business-like. They're doing it for the money, and they know the rules of the game. They're very savvy. They've got good solicitors. They've got good access to advice. They've also got good networks to then profit even further. So I'm told, profit even further from your misfortune if you're unlucky enough to have a warehouse full of this stuff. They'll come back and take it all away from you for a fee. So all this stuff's going all around the country, being dumped, and people are paying through the nose to have it moved on, and it's quite scandalous. And it's basically because, well, I would be getting a bit too controversial if I said it's because the law is inadequate. But whereas there is a law controlling the trespassing and occupation of your private house, and that the law was changed in 2012. There is no change to the civil law governing commercial premises. If you were at the Bristol Authority Manchester seminar, you may have seen these slides, which were shown by James Fee of the Empty Premises Protection Company, VPS. And here, in this case study of his, there was theft and fly tipping. The alarm system in there wasn't perhaps being maintained, is the thought, but then I'm not sure that would have made a lot of difference. The main thing about this case, it seems to me, is that nobody had been around to inspect the building for 2 months, and when they did, they found this. So the waste removal alone is £200,000. So what do we do about a void building? Well, these are all the obvious things that these void company protection firms will tell you to do, quite rightly. Seal all your openings. You've probably seen the patented steel screens that go up. Alternatively, brick up any windows you don't want or seal them up in some way. They will supply you with temporary alarm systems. They're not expensive. Chain up all your gates and everything, but also put 5-ton, man-sized 5-ton interlocking concrete blocks across your vehicular access. Consider putting a guard in. That depends on your risk and your budget. Consider engaging one of these property protection companies if you want their service, whereby they come round and have a look for you and draw up a report. They'll tell you if there's things going on in the neighbourhood you should be concerned about, with people beginning to take an interest in a particular part of the world in which you're interested. And then finally, the most controversial bullet, of course, is consider a guardian service. This is a relatively new service, which we'll talk a bit more about in a minute. We'll talk about it now, actually. Guardian services, a guardian is a vetted member of the public. These people are essentially in employment. They are typically essential workers and students, and they're prepared to live in a given building as their residence, not for a rent, but under license. And the cost of this license is considerably less than the equivalent rent would be on the type of accommodation they're given, so I'm told. So the guardian service will fit the building out, if necessary, to be suitable for decent habitation, up to a decent standard. They generally say put in a new kitchen, supply a bit of cheap furniture. Well, I don't mean to demean it, but inexpensive furniture. They will make sure that there is a fully functional fire alarm, probably replace it, and make sure the gas and electricity supplies are all up to standard and subject to maintenance contracts. But these guardians are not security people. They're members of the public. They go out to work. There is nothing in their contract in fact, they're expressly told, you are not a security guard. You don't get involved with intruders. Obviously, anything that is something you feel the property owner should know about that could be detrimental to the building, you should report straight away to the guardian firm, and action will be taken. That's all you do. So the pros and cons of this, I know it's a bit controversial that insurers take different views on the merits and demerits of guardian services. The pros, well, it is, I think you probably have to accept it, it is a deterrent if the bad guys can see people coming in and out and they appear to be normal people living there. These people are, to a good extent, the eyes and ears of the owner. And they tell me in London and the South East particularly, there are significant financial advantages in the form of commercial rent reductions. If you're able to say, well, my building is no longer, I don't know, a biscuit factory, it is now in residential occupation in a small way, then apparently your rental base, your rate assessment basis, or whatever you call the rates these days, is significantly improved. And I suppose you could argue the building is being maintained and is being heated in the winter to some extent. Now the cons, and there are some, a couple of things really stand out. The insurer isn't able to impose its normal empty building conditions, policy conditions, such as making sure all the services are switched off, letterboxes are all sealed up and that sort of thing. All those standard conditions that you would apply can't be applied. The occupation may only be one wing of a building, I suppose. That could be an issue. I mean, overall, the big thing I think for insurance underwriters is to look at the propositions case by case. And equally, as with this third bullet point, to look at the contract wordings case by case, because they vary. There's no standard wording. And if the contracts, both for the guardian and between the guardian service and the owner, are a bit woolly, you might want to, that might put you on your, it might make you a bit cautious. So you want to make sure the custodians, the guardians, are tied down on things like absences and bringing stuff into the holding parties, bringing stuff onto site, going away on holiday and whatever. At least one of these guardians has challenged in court the guarding firm and said, "Oh no, the way I was dealt with leads me and my solicitor to think that I was being offered a tenancy here, and you're not getting me out at the end of the license period. These licensing periods may only last, say, 3 months." So he sat pat and he said, "Well, no, I'm a tenant now, so you'll have to get me out under tenancy legislation." I don't know what the upshot of that was, but it's something to be aware of. And I have mentioned, are there additional risks being introduced by guardians? Are they bringing heating onto site that you wouldn't have there normally? Are they bringing in electrical appliances that are not PAT tested, and so on and so forth? If you are unlucky enough to have a trespass incident, I do recommend that you or your client acts very, very quickly, get moving straight away on it, because squatters, if they find somewhere or see somewhere as a prospect squat, they will network. They have a number of websites, and they will share the information around very quickly and effectively. So you need to try and get in before them. And if you go there and you think you may have had people in there, but they're not present at the time, I hope I'm right in saying that the advice would be, well, get in there, repossess the building, make sure it's then all sealed up to a higher standard than it had been. But of course, if the squatters are present and if they have taken an interest in it, they probably are present, then the key thing is to immediately say, look, you're not entitled to be here. This is our building, and you should leave. Well, what happens then? You see, the thing is, as I've indicated, being merely on commercial premises is not in itself a criminal offence. It's not a criminal offence in the law. You need to take civil action, and this is where the law differs from private houses. And here are the 3 or 4 moves you can make. there is a very ancient law, a common law that says you're entitled to recover your own land, and you can use so-called reasonable force. And in suitable cases, if you get away with doing this route, you will get repossession very quickly. However, it's fraught with dangers and landmines and elephant traps. Certainly DIY, do-it-yourself, is not recommended at all. You need to use certificated enforcement agents, the professionals. They will advise you whether or not it looks suitable for this route. Your solicitor will have a view on it, and very selective use of this measure is encouraged. You're not likely to get very much interest from the police. You are going to be running up just as big a bill with the bailiffs, the certificated enforcement agents, as you will ultimately, if you fail, as you will ultimately have to do if you use the more formal route which we come to. Secondly, there is a piece of legislation impinging on the police. Section 61 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994. The police, if the certain conditions are met, such as the number of people on site and they have vehicles or caravans on site and they've caused damage or whatever, then if these conditions are met, the police do have the power, and I stress the power, to evict them and to eject them. But obviously, they particularly can act if there is overtly a crime going on, such as fly tipping. But otherwise, I think this is a bit of a dead duck from what I've been told. You are very unlikely, because of the sheer numbers of people involved on these sites and the small numbers of police very often who turn up, and the potential for a huge punch-up, health and safety issues are raised, all sorts of things come into play. The police will usually back off and say, look, mate, this is a civil matter. This is not for the police force. Talk to the court. And here we are. This is the formal, official, and, if you like, more copper-bottomed way of doing it, for want of a better expression. A county court possession order via Part 55 of the Civil Procedure Rules. And the police are much more likely to want to, or be prepared to be in attendance when this ejection takes place on the basis of SEP, someone else's problem, because it's now a civil matter. It's now the county court, or maybe even the High Court, who have decreed that these people must leave. There's a writ, if that's the word, and the High Court bailiffs are empowered by the court to act on behalf of the court and go ahead and eject these people using reasonable force. Now, the police will, I think and believe, very generally be, if it's a big case especially, they'll be at least in attendance, standing back. They won't try not to get involved and let the High Court enforcement officers eject these people. If you act quickly, and that's why I said at the start, act quickly, because you have the benefit of a subset of this legislation called an interim possession order, which enables you to get these folks out in literally a few days. It's an accelerated process, provided you apply within 28 days of the occupation becoming known. You'll get them out quickly. You won't have to wait it says there, you may have to wait 7 or 8 weeks. That's a bit pessimistic, maybe 4 weeks. But you won't have to wait that long. And of course, if these people are fly tipping, you don't want to wait at all. So in summary, first of that kind of sort of semi-flowchart process here, first box, will they go? If not, you've got the common law option. You could ask the police if they'll act. They probably won't. But then what this slide is trying to say is, why don't you just go? Because this is really, I think, what a lot of people would say. Not necessarily me saying this, but I think people who know about this legally would say, look, just don't mess about. Go straight for an IPO under Section 55 and have it done the correct way with High Court enforcement officers. And if you do all that, can you sit back and relax? Well, no, I'm afraid you can't, because if the trespassers return and reoccupy the building, you have to go back to court. So as soon as they've gone, you really pin down that building, lock it down with your concrete blocks and your shutters and your chains and your everything else, and put a guard in for sure, or 2 guards, and that way they will move on. They'll find somewhere easier. Thank you for listening, and if there are any questions, I'm sure there aren't, but if there are, I'll try and deal with them.
Okay, thanks, Mike. No, we've got no questions. I know. So obviously you covered everything perfectly in your presentation. Apologies for the bit of the feedback at the start. We got to mute my microphone. I had a few problems uploading the file this morning. No questions are coming through. So thank you very much for listening. Our next webinar is on the 15th of September. It's going to be presented by Simon Bird. We've got some new guidance to be published on ESFR sprinklers. So Simon's going to do a webinar on that. Thank you very much for attending, and hope you have a very nice weekend. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.